I received the divorce decree while stationed in the Azariah Desert, a place where the scorching winds carry more than just sand. They carry echoes of home I could no longer hear. My inbox chimed just before dawn, the subject line curt and clinical. Let's be adults about this. In that moment, 13 years of shared birthdays, late-night worries, and whispered promises evaporated into a cold PDF attachment. I'm Nolan Caldwell, 42, Staff Sergeant in the 7th Ranger Battalion. 4 long months I'd spent in the blistering dunes, pushing through patrols and convoys, months during which Sarah's silence turned into something I would come to recognize as finality. The message itself was mercilessly succinct. 3 sentences, each a scalpel slicing through the past. First, I've filed the paperwork. Second, our joint accounts are empty. Third, Ethan's moved into the house. Ethan, her new boyfriend, already unpacking his life in our home back in Redmont, Washington, while I stood on the edge of the world, my world, with nothing but the shifting sands beneath my boots. I stared at my tablet's flickering screen until the desert glare stole its light. Twice I read the words. The third time I shut it and slipped it into my satchel. The heat of the communal shower barely registered as I scrubbed away the grit of another day's duty. In the barracks, the routine remained unchanged. I donned my fatigues, clipped on my dog tags, and walked to my post without a word. That night, back in the dim confines of my bunk, I tapped out a single response. Understood. No tears, no pleas, no rage-filled vows of retaliation. Just acknowledgement. Owen, my bunkmate, glanced over from his rack. "You good, man?" he asked, eyes still glued to his paperback. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Just some stuff back home." No more questions. Military men learn early that certain battles aren't fought in words. Truth is, I shouldn't have been surprised. 6 months before deployment, Sarah's behavior shifted in ways I chose to dismiss as stress. Her daily inquiries about base life faded. Instead, she found herself burning the midnight oil at the Evergreen Dental Clinic, where she'd taken an administrative job after shelving her nursing ambitions. She joined a high-end gym, sweat rarely broke her brow, and purchased clothes that didn't fit her quiet style. New colleagues populated her stories, and I never met a single one. When I mentioned her phone's new passcode, she smiled and changed the subject. I didn't pry, that kind of man I was, but I watched, and I felt the cold fingers of doubt trace my spine. I began my own preparations without fanfare. A climate-controlled unit at the edge of Redmont sheltered documents no one could argue over. My birth certificate, the marriage license issued in my name alone thanks to the VA-backed loan, the deed to our 3-bedroom house, all safely locked behind a heavy padlock. There I also stashed my grandfather's tarnished pocket watch and my mother's silver locket. Small items perhaps, but tethered me to people I loved. A separate savings account, another bank, another branch, started to fill quietly with a fraction of each paycheck. Not enough to trip her suspicions, but enough so I wouldn't be cast adrift should our union dissolve. The night before I shipped out, Sarah and I said goodbye at the airport. She hugged me, soft, perfunctory, and whispered, "Stay safe, okay?" Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. It felt like the farewell one gives a coworker on temporary assignment, not the parting of a husband and wife. Even then, a small voice inside me whispered warnings, but in the chaos of orders and flight manifests, I silenced it. I left believing maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. Back in Redmont, we'd met at a summer barbecue hosted by our mutual friend Jason. I was home between tours, seared by desert heat, and longing for something steady. Sarah, finishing nursing school, chose a quieter path in dental administration. "Less stress," she'd said, eyeing Jason's backyard spread of burgers and beer. 8 months later, we walked down a wooded aisle, exchanging vows under low-hanging pines. I loved her then. Her laughter, her softness, a calm harbor in a storm-tossed life. Life settled into that comfortable rhythm couples know. A modest home, mortgage in my name alone, but the deed in both our hands. Shared dinners, plans for children that never quite materialized. My father's sudden death, a heart attack in a snow-can snowstorm, rocked me hardest. My mother's passing from lung cancer 2 years later left me unmoored. But Sarah was my rock then, paying off her student loans with the inheritance, smoothing over the jagged grief I carried in my chest. I deployed 4 more times, twice to Iraq, twice to deserts like Azariah, and returned each time to a wife whose warmth eroded just a little more. When I suggested re-enlisting for another term, Sarah's voice cracked. I didn't sign up to be a permanent military wife, she said, arms folded. I'm tired of being alone. I understood, and I didn't. The army had been home since age 20. It was where my skill, my purpose, and my camaraderie lay. Her family, bankers, and pharmacists, never quite grasped my world. But I loved her, and love necessitates compromise, so we endured. In 2019, cracks turned into chasms. I'd call during her Friday dinners with friends. She'd brush me off impatiently. Conversations drifted to her friend Melissa's divorce and newfound freedom, the things marriages supposedly couldn't offer. I suggested counseling. She waved it away as a phase. Soon she was late at the clinic, vanished on weekend trips with people whose faces I'd never seen, and bought gym memberships she rarely used. Confrontation never sat right with me. I was raised to measure every word and weigh every deed. So I observed, and I readied myself. 2 weeks after the detonation of that email, my phone pinged in the mess hall, our bank app. A withdrawal. $8,500. Almost everything left in the joint account. Fork frozen halfway to my mouth, I unlocked the app. $212 staring back at me. Our $47,000 savings account? Empty. Transferred all of it to an unfamiliar number. Logan, across the table, cocked his head. Trouble at home? I shut my phone. Just finances, I lied. That night, I navigated the base phone line to our bank. Sarah had been siphoning funds in stealthy increments, then in rapid-fire transfers the moment I flew out of SeaTac. Standing in the barracks hallway, I watched laughter and family calls drift through the walls while my life unraveled. Owen found me there unasked. You okay? No judgment, just solidarity. I told him everything. His response? What's your plan? Not sympathy, but pragmatism. Unable to sleep, I accessed our home security feed, a system Sarah likely forgot I could reach remotely. On screen, a dark truck idled in our driveway. A stranger walked our Labrador, sipped coffee from my favorite mug, wore my old base sweatshirt. Inside, Sarah laughed in our granite kitchen sanctuary, my handiwork from the last leave. I felt neither fury nor sorrow. Instead, a cold clarity settled in my bones. I closed the laptop and drafted a mission checklist. Contact Caleb. The old army buddy turned attorney. Review VA loan stipulations. Consult my first sergeant on emergency leave. Verify pension safeguards. This was no longer personal pain, it was strategy. At 500 hours, I fired off a discreet email to Caleb, need legal help, urgent. He replied within the hour, call me, secure line. After that conversation, I knew precisely how to proceed. No threats, no confrontations. I'd let her actions be the snare. 2 months later, I returned to American soil, unannounced. No texts, no calls. I checked into a motel in Redmont under an alias, then met Caleb 10 miles out of town. He handed me folders. Mortgage statements, bank records, and a startling find. A refinance application bearing my signature, or at least an attempt at it. The middle initial was wrong, the pen strokes uneven. Sarah had tried to mortgage our home, to pull out $30,000 from equity that was mine by law, then vanish, file for divorce, lock me out entirely. And that, I thought as dawn light crept through the motel curtains, is why I never start fights, but I always finish them. It was past mid-morning when Caleb leaned back in his chair and offered what I needed to hear. It gets better, he said, tapping a pen against the folder on his desk. My heart thudded. This was not at all what I expected from my lawyer. He slid the papers across to me. She listed Ethan Ryan as a co-applicant on the refinance, he explained quietly. I glanced down. Ethan's name beside mine, meager credit history overshadowed by his 2 DUI convictions and the 2019 fraud charge. My breath hitching, I asked the question I'd been dreading. What are my options? Caleb paused, letting the silence stretch. Several, he finally replied. But first, you need to decide what you want. And as the sun rose higher beyond the blinds, I realized exactly what I did want, what was legally mine, and the knowledge that Sarah would learn there are real consequences for her choices. The following morning, I found myself driving slowly past our house on Elmwood Drive in Redmont. The early sunlight glinted off the trim and the lawn I'd mowed myself so many weekends. Sarah's silver crossover sat empty in the driveway, and the rumble of Ethan's old pickup was gone. For a moment, I considered pulling in, knocking on the door, demanding answers face to face. But I reminded myself that confrontation wasn't part of this strategy. My fight would play out in boardrooms and police stations, not living rooms. Instead, I headed to the local branch of Crestview Bank, where the refinance had been processed. I introduced myself to the loan officer, a young woman named Kelly who looked nervous the moment she recognized my military ID. I placed my driver's license, signature matching mine, next to the forged documents they'd accepted from Sarah. Her face paled, her composure fractured. "I'll need to report this," she whispered, voice shaking. "I understand," I said, voice steady. "I've already filed a police report." I left the bank with the weight of validation settled on my shoulders, official acknowledgement that someone had crossed a line. That evening, my phone buzzed with an unexpected text from Sarah. "Who have you been talking to at the bank? Ethan said someone was asking questions." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard before I set the phone aside without replying. The next day, I drove to the county clerk's office and filed formal paperwork contesting the refinance on grounds of fraud. I also registered a restriction on the property title, a legally binding notice that no changes to ownership or loans could be made without my explicit consent. 2 days later, Sarah called again. I let it go to voicemail. Her recorded message was calm and calculated. "Nolan, we need to talk. The bank is calling about the house. If this is about the divorce, we can handle it like adults." I shivered at the irony of her words echoing back at me. That afternoon, Caleb called with news that quickened my pulse. "They've frozen the refinance funds," he said. "But there's more. Ethan was pulled over this morning in your truck driving on a suspended license. They impounded the vehicle." I closed my eyes against the swell of emotions. "Good," I managed to say. "Anything else?" he hesitated. "Yes. They found prescription pads from the Evergreen Dental Clinic in the truck. Active pads, not blank ones." My stomach dropped. Sarah stealing prescription pads? A cold knot formed in my chest. Caleb told me the police were investigating. I sat on the edge of my motel bed, feeling the room tilt beneath me. This was spiraling far beyond a marital breakup or financial dispute. Sleep eluded me that night, and at dawn I met with Thompson, the bank's fraud investigator, in a cramped office stacked with yellowing files. He was a short man, cafe-stained tie, eyes that betrayed exhaustion. "Spouses of deployed soldiers exploiting VA loans, more common than people think," he said, flipping through the refinance paperwork. He'd managed to freeze the bulk of the funds, but half, $14,600.00, had already vanished. I pressed him for answers. Where did it go? He insisted he couldn't tell me. It's a matter of client confidentiality. But then he rotated his monitor to face me, and I saw the list. Multiple transfers to someone named Marcus Spencer. Not Ethan Ryan. Marcus Spencer. A name I didn't recognize. Immediately I called Caleb. "Marcus Spencer," he repeated, after his own research. "He's a real estate agent. Quick sales specialty, cash deals." My heart thumped as I realized Sarah and Ethan were arranging to sell our house out from under me. "The deposits?" I asked. "Likely earnest money." Caleb's tone grew careful. "And here's the catch. Spencer has worked with Ethan Ryan before. 3 deals in 2 years. The severity of their operation hit me like a hammer. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated conspiracy aimed at profiting off military families. I pictured the green lawns and white picket fences of Redmont, twisted now into a marketable commodity for their scheme. In the days that followed, I learned that Ethan had a pattern, targeting women whose spouses were overseas, collaborating with Spencer to refinance or sell properties cheap, splitting profits under the radar. In research I did on my own, I found accounts of at least 3 other wives in similar positions, homes sold below market value, forged documents signed in absentia, peace shattered in the name of profit. Caleb confirmed he'd contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. "This crosses state lines," he said, "involves VA loans, military personnel. They're very interested." That was the first time since reading Sarah's divorce email that I felt something like relief. Not joy at my marriage's end, but satisfaction that the truth was emerging. The FBI agents at Agent Patel and Agent Donovan met me in Spokane's field office. I watched them record my statement, photocopy every scrap of evidence Caleb and I had assembled. Your case establishes a pattern, Agent Patel told me. It transforms isolated complaints into a full-blown conspiracy. I asked softly about Sarah, my voice betraying the tangle of anger and sadness. Donovan exchanged a glance with Patel. We're still determining her level of involvement, he said. Did she ever mention financial stress or pressure to sell? I thought back. Her offhand comments about being house poor, her urging that we downsize. I had dismissed it then, too distracted by paperwork and patrol orders to see the signals. Patel scribbled notes as I described the timeline of lies and stolen documents. At the end of the interview, I held Patel's card. Don't engage with them, she advised. Let us build the case. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle. Outside, spring light filtered through the blinds, dust motes drifting like suspended secrets. For the first time in months, part of me felt steady again. That evening I returned to the neighborhood. I parked across from our house. Sarah's silver crossover was gone, but Ethan's beat-up pickup was back, the bumper dented during impound. At 6 p.m., my phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. We need to talk in person. Meet me at Riverfront Park tomorrow. Call in the morning. I showed the message to Caleb at breakfast. Don't go, he warned, stirring his coffee. Right now, any meeting with her could be a setup. I agreed I wouldn't meet her, but I wanted to know what she would do while she thought I would. So at 9:30 a.m. the next day, I and a discreet lawyer's assistant parked in the lot across from Riverfront Park and watched Sarah drive by, heading toward the pavilion. She'd left the house empty again, trusting that the man she thought defeated would never return. 20 minutes later, a black sedan emblazoned with Marcus Spencer's real estate logo pulled up to our curb on Elmwood Drive. Ethan hopped out, greeting Spencer with a handshake and a sly smile. The two headed inside, likely to discuss the final paperwork. Caleb asked if we should follow them. I shook my head. I'd installed concealed security cameras inside and out last year, cameras Sarah had ignored. Everything streamed to the cloud, crystal clear evidence of the moment they sealed their betrayal. The afternoon sun burned into the windshield as I watched them from 7 blocks away. Their voices were muted, their gestures casual, but in my mind I ran through the chain of custody. Forged signatures, fraudulent applications, illicit transfers. The mosaic of their crimes stitched itself into a damning picture. I reached for my phone and dialed Agent Patel's number. They're meeting now, I reported. Streaming live. Patel's calm voice on the other end confirmed that our plan was unfolding. They would move in, gather every shred of footage, and secure arrests. As evening approached, the first faint breeze of summer drifted through the motel window. I poured myself a bottle of beer, a small ritual of relief, and let the silence fill the room. The path ahead would be long. Depositions, hearings, courtroom battles. Sarah's voice might tremble when she realized her empire of lies was crumbling. Ethan's confident smirk would dissolve into desperation. Marcus Spencer's quick cash deals would become evidence of a predatory scheme. And me. Staff Sergeant Nolan Caldwell, 42, veteran of 4 deployments, would watch from the sidelines, letting my adversaries hang themselves with the rope they'd woven. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Agent Patel at the field office again. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel something close to satisfaction. Not at the end of my marriage, that wound was still raw, but at the certainty that the truth, long buried under forged documents and stolen signatures, would finally see the light of day. I raised my beer in a silent toast. Not to victory, but to justice, finally on track. And to the promise that this time, I would finish the fight I never asked for, but was ready to win. That evening, as twilight settled over the quiet neighborhood on Elmwood Drive, I finally allowed myself to watch the live security feed one last time. Ethan Ryan and Marcus Spencer, my house's would-be conquerors, stood shoulder to shoulder amid the furniture whose purchase my wife and I had once planned together. Spencer clicked photographs of the polished hardwood floors I'd installed during my last leave, while Ethan, his smirk barely concealed, pointed out the bay window I'd spent weekends replacing. Their casual banter pierced me. We'll list by Friday, Spencer murmured, his voice low enough that casual passersby would hear only the distant hum of an ordinary real estate showing. Offer $420,000, 0 cents, let him counter at $470, 0 cents, and they'll settle. Ethan shrugged his shoulders. What about the husband, he asked. He's causing trouble. Spencer waved off the question. Military guys, they bark loud, but they're gone half the year. He'll take a settlement. I pressed my finger against the screen, the glass cool under my touch, and forwarded the live feed to Agent Patel. They're inside right now, I messaged. 30 minutes later, black and white FBI SVVs crunched over gravel, surrounding the curb at my former address. I watched from a parked rental down the block as agents in bulletproof vests led Spencer and Ethan out in crisp handcuffs, their faces stunned into silence. My phone rang immediately. Agent Patel's voice was calm but triumphant. We've got them on tape discussing every detail of the fraud. Conspiracy, wire fraud, attempted sale under false pretenses, charges are coming. As I exhaled, I realized how deeply I'd breathed without noticing. The following day, at Spencer and Ryan's preliminary hearing, I sat in the back of the courtroom wearing my dress blues. The cabin's sunlight filtered through high windows, illuminating dusty moats that hovered like forgotten memories. Spencer's attorney, a plump man with yellowing documents stacked before him, argued that his client was merely an opportunistic broker, unaware of Sarah's forged signature. Ethan's public defender insisted the truck incident was a simple traffic violation, unrelated to the refinance. But I watched the jury's eyes narrow, shifting between my somber expression and the cold, hard evidence. Bank statements, webcam footage, forged loan documents displayed on the clerk's monitor. Each clip, each spreadsheet, was another nail driven into the coffin of their lies. When the judge announced that both men had accepted plea deals, Ethan pleading guilty to identity theft, conspiracy, and wire fraud in exchange for 8 years, Spencer taking 12 for conspiracy and money laundering, I felt neither elation nor vindication. Instead, a gentle relief washed over me, as if I'd closed a chapter that had been left open for far too long. Meanwhile, Sarah stood in the courthouse hallway, her face drawn, as her own attorney wheeled boxes of documents toward the elevator. When our eyes met, hers rimmed red with unshed tears, I recognized the finality of her remorse. She claimed ignorance of the wider scheme, insisting that Ethan had convinced her I was hiding assets, that I planned to abandon her financially. He made it sound like I'd be left with nothing, she told the press after exiting a side door, her voice wavering. Perhaps she believed it. Or perhaps she clung to that narrative to preserve some fragment of innocence. In the weeks that followed, she agreed to a settlement, full restitution of the stolen funds, relinquishment of any claim on the house or my VA back pension, and a signed confession acknowledging the forgery. In return, I agreed not to press charges against her. It felt like the most generous act of my life, to pardon the person I once loved most. But her signature on that agreement carried the weight of truth. She had crossed a line I could not forgive, yet chose mercy over retribution. 6 months after Sarah's initial email from the desert, the divorce was finalized in a quiet Spokane courtroom. No fault, clean break, and the finality of it all was punctuated by the judge's gavel, striking like a verdict against our past. On the drive back to Missoula, where I'd taken a 1-year rental near the Clark Fork River, I felt a hollow ache where I once carried hope. But amid the emptiness, my phone rang. Agent Patel with news. Ethan Ryan was sentenced this morning, 8 years, maximum security. Spencer got 12 in federal prison. You should know. I told her thank you, my voice steady yet faint. Then she added softly, we uncovered evidence they targeted 11 other military families. Your case was the linchpin. I stared at the phone, feeling a tingle of pride alongside the sadness. 12 more families. They would get their homes and savings back because I refused to be silent, because I fought. That evening, I sat on the porch of the little log cabin I had purchased outside Missoula. The mountains loomed purple against the sunset, the river's current whispering a lullaby for new beginnings. I let my German Shepherd, Ranger, settle at my feet and looked down at a letter pinned to the refrigerator inside. It was from Angela, a Navy wife in Texas whose story mirrored mine too closely. You saved our home, she wrote, and gave us hope that justice still mattered. Some days, the stillness weighed heavy, the silence amplifying memories I wished to forget. But I found solace in her words, evidence that something good had emerged from destruction. Every time the wind rustled through the pines, it sounded like possibilities whispering in my ear. Over the next year, I rebuilt my life one board at a time, doing carpentry work for neighbors, fixing sagging porches, crafting built-in bookshelves, repairing weathered fences. My hands knew this work intimately. It demanded attention to detail, patience, and the quiet pride of creation. Evenings were spent by the wood stove with Ranger curled at my side, the soft crackle of burning logs competing with the distant call of an owl. My military pension covered the essentials: food, heat, Ranger's vet bills. My heart, once a battlefield, found peace in the routine rhythms of hammer on nail and saw against timber. Sometimes, I wondered where Sarah had landed. Caleb mentioned she'd returned to her hometown in Oregon, working at a small dental office and starting over like so many before her. Maybe she found contentment in the familiar cadence of filing insurance claims and scheduling cleanings. Or maybe regret shadowed her days whenever she passed a VA loan sign. I held no hatred for her anymore, only a quiet acceptance that our paths had irreversibly diverged. She had made her choices, I had made mine. Late one afternoon, I received a postcard from Angela, her handwriting looping neatly across the back. Camp Pendleton, it read, marking her husband's base. We're coming through Montana next month. Would love to meet in person. Thanks again for giving us hope. I pinned it beside Sarah's letter on the fridge, a testament to the unexpected ripples of one man's stand against injustice. My life had become something new, something that could not be stolen, forged, or betrayed. It was a life reconstructed from the broken pieces of trust, stronger for having endured the fracture. On crisp autumn mornings, Ranger and I hiked the trails behind the cabin, the forest alive with rust-colored ferns and wood smoke. Each step forward felt like a prayer answered, the promise of peace after turmoil, the reward of integrity after deceit. I no longer measured my worth in deployments or promotions. I measured it in the warmth of Ranger's nuzzle, the satisfaction of a job completed well, and the knowledge that, when faced with a choice between fury and justice, I chose the latter. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I found myself reflecting on 13 years of marriage, its joys, its missteps, its untimely collapse. I did not pretend the pain had vanished. It lingered like an echo in the empty rooms of that house I no longer owned. But in its place, I nurtured something new: resilience. And in that resilience, I discovered an unexpected gift: compassion for those who falter, and gratitude for those who stand firm. My final toast to the past was on a snowy evening, Ranger curled in front of a roaring fire, a half-finished deck awaiting spring. I raised a glass of scotch, an echo of one of Sarah's old vices, and smiled at the dancing flames. To beginnings, I murmured, voice low enough that only Ranger could hear, though he was asleep, and to building something that's truly mine. Outside, the wind brushed against the cabin, as though in agreement, and for the first time in a long while, I believed it.